You are listening to the Enormocast.
I don't know what's happening in your neck of the woods, but out here in the great American West, it's the start of desert crack season, which means two things. The bros are charging up their Bluetooth speakers, and people are wondering where the hell they're going to get enough cams. But Black Diamond has your back. On top of the heap are the Camelot Ultralights. Cams so fleet that Elon Musk once shot one into space strapped to a bottle rocket. And then there's the venerable C4, the cam that still rules the creek. And legend has it, if you whisper Camelot, Camelot, Camelot into a mirror while holding a red C4 to your forehead, the location of the easiest for you 12- will be revealed. And don't forget the dinky Camelot X4s and X4 offsets. But do forget about clean underwear if you start whipping on the .1 in sandstone. But wherever your crack reveals itself, remember, BD has you covered with the sweetest cams known to man. Check them all out at blackdiamondequipment.com or your favorite local shop. Does your neck hurt playing someone else's project? Does your partner get in way over his head even on the warm-ups? Does the phrase, "I'll just do this move one more time," make your eyeballs spin? Then let Belay Specs fight for you.
When my boyfriend started falling lower and lower on his project, Belay Specs saved my neck and got me a new boyfriend.
Belay or neck pain, also known as BNP, can interfere with work, play, family, and snapping your head around at the gym to check out those abs. And you have rights, which are being crushed every time your partner yells take. So if your neck has been injured in an epic belay session, go to belayspecs.com to see if you qualify for a pair of Belay Specs and to get what you deserve. Enter Enormocast at checkout for a discount. Belay Specs is not licensed to give legal advice to anyone. Results may vary by steepness. If Belay Specs cause you to trip, fall down, run into a door, nausea, dry mouth, you're probably too high to climb to begin with.
All right, are we good? We done here? Does anybody want to get a beer?
We gotta get.
Listen, where you playing in town? You playing here?
We're doing the Enormo Dome, whatever it is. It's terrific.
Oh
It's
yeah,
a
big
house. We
place
sold
that
it out.
side of town. That's a
Very
big
nice.
place. You sold
What's
it
that,
out.
20,000 seats?
We
really should.
The hell are you doing? I couldn't sleep. I'm checking the ropes. There was a frayed end on your rope, and I'm cutting it out.
Good weather, bad weather. No, later, anytime.
Today's show is brought to you by Black Diamond Equipment, with support from Maxim Ropes.
And the fine folks at La Sportiva. And don't forget our charter sponsor, Bonfire Coffee. Go to bonfirecoffee.com and enter Enormo at checkout for a discount on great coffee and to support the Enormocast.
And now back to the show.
Hello and welcome to the Enormocast. This is your host, Chris Cluse. It is about 11 o'clock here in Colorado on March 19th, 2018. On today's show, American Alpine Club CEO, Phil Powers. And I want to thank the American Alpine Club again for having me out to the Boston Benefit Dinner. It was great to be out there, see how things work on the inside of the club. We managed to sit down with Phil out there between all the various responsibilities that he had. And had a great time. And, you know, we talk about this in the interview and the history of the American Alpine Club, even where it combines with my history as a climber, has changed a lot. I was pretty ambivalent about it when I started climbing. It seemed like kind of the old guys club and didn't really have much to do with me as a rock climber. It seemed to be all about the big mountains, which I sort of had dreams of getting to, but as a dirtbag climber with no history, I didn't feel like I was involved in that level of alpinism and of mountain climbing that American Alpine Club seemed to be involved in. But as me and Phil get to in this interview, a lot of that's changed. They've really opened their ranks and their ideas and their philosophies to try to include all climbers. And I really think that the organization now is kind of a mandatory membership sort of thing. If for no other reason than you get some rescue insurance, which, you know, can come in handy out there in the world that we operate in. So I think that along with your Access Fund membership, American Alpine Club membership should be just part of the cost of doing business out there as a climber. And besides, if you're buying gear, you can quickly make up the dues and discounts and break even and still have that insurance and get the Alpine Journal and get the Accidents of American Mountaineering. No, it's called the Accidents of North American Climbing now. See what they're doing there? Little shift. Check it out at AmericanAlpineClub.org. See what they got going on. Maybe apply for a grant. Might give you some money to go on a climbing trip. Right there. Boom. All right. That's really all I got going on right now. Just some climbing outdoors because it's quite nice here in Colorado right now. Good season. Some skiing still happening, but people are getting on their mountain bikes in the lowlands. There's some ice climbing to be had, but of course the crags are starting to open up and dry off in the sun. So, nice time of year, March. Spring break everywhere, so you got to kind of hide from the masses this time of year around the West. But yeah, it certainly is nice out there. Hope you guys are having fun out there, and I hope you enjoy this one with Phil Powers. Now, we all know that Sportiva makes the best climbing shoes this side of the Parthenon. But it turns out that even the most dedicated dirtbags have to spend an ungodly amount of time on the flats among the sad, lost, lowland civilians. And that's where Sportiva's approach shoes come in. Legends like the Boulder X can comfortably scramble you up slabs, boulders, easy pitches until the big guns come out. And for when you're not actually in the mountains, well, as you peruse the hemp milk selection at the whole paycheck, nothing says, "Don't fuck with me, I've climbed El Cap," like a brightly colored pair of TX3s that are relentlessly scuffing the floor. Bellied up to the bar for that post-near-death experience beer, let them know those gobies didn't come from labor with a pair of impossibly lightweight TX2s. After all, isn't the day-to-day drudgery just a protracted scramble to the next climb? Whether you're actually at the cliff or just standing up in your best friend's wedding, you better be ready in a pair of multi-sport approach shoes from Sportiva. Within climbing, you've got these three, it seems like pillars or bases.
Okay.
Kind of who you are.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think with the AAC, you've also got, a fairly concerted effort and history around public policy work.
Right.
Which is, it's embedded in that American Alpine Club world, but I was involved in public policy back at the National Outdoor Leadership School and working as a board member at the AMGA too.
How long have you been at the AAC in any capacity, but also as
I've only been
director?
in one capacity,
Okay.
which originally was called executive director and now is titled CEO. Same job. 13 years now.
Okay, long time.
Yeah, a long time. Longer than I thought it would be.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What did you imagine?
I thought if I was doing a good job that I'd be there about 10 years.
Oh, okay.
It
living
takes
on borrowed time then.
I'm living on borrowed time. I'm enjoying it. The first years were difficult. The club was small, and even shrinking, not particularly relevant. We were saying goodbye to a lot of members, and so those early years were difficult years.
So let's see, 13 years
2005.
ago. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's get into a little bit of the history. That's a fine place to start. I want to talk about your personal climbing.
Sure.
Some of your other stuff before this, but we're here at the AAC annual benefit dinner, so it's a perfect place to start. We just watched a big presentation on K2 on the 1978 expedition, they were talking about how it was sponsored or developed or whatever by the American Alpine Club. How long has it been in existence?
The club?
Yeah.
Club was started in 1902.
Oh.
So quite a while ago.
Okay, cool. In that capacity, it's usually associated in all those years with the big expedition climbing.
For a long portion of the club's history, it really did three things.
Okay.
It housed a library, which is now grown to be really the world's most established mountaineering library. It created the American Alpine Journal, and that publishing function has grown and shrunk over the years, but we also publish Accidents in North American Climbing. And then the third thing it did for many, many years was endorse expeditions.
Okay.
Sometimes that came with funding. Sometimes it did not. But in order to get a permit in Pakistan or Nepal, for decades, you needed the endorsement of your nation's alpine club.
Okay.
That's no longer true.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, but it is like there is that tradition of these clubs, and you're right. To me, they've gone on. I think the tradition is longer and more continuing in other countries in terms of the Alpine Club. But when you said endorsement, it did make me think like, you got like the blessing of the men on high, but it also served this function of
there was an expeditions
right,
committee. It
right.
would receive applications. Those expeditions that looked like they were well put together would get a letter of endorsement that was necessary to get a permission, a permit in Nepal or Pakistan.
Right, okay. And so you mentioned you started in 2005 at a place where it wasn't very big, it was shrinking, you were losing members, and obviously you rode out that transition, and I think it's obviously much stronger now, which you can be proud of.
It's a lot of fun these days.
Yeah. So tell me about that, if it was a crisis or if it was just a trend, or tell me about those moments and kind of what you saw and what you were facing at that point.
I really think when I was hired, I was sort of charged with two goals. One was to build a museum, and the other was to turn the club around.
No big deal.
And building the museum, which was wonderful and well-funded and a beautiful outcome, really did nothing to turn the club around. So you had this several $million project that had to be accomplished, really sort of to get that done and out of the way before you could really before I could really turn my attention to the business itself. And, we do approach it as a business. I do. It's really a benefits and services business at its core. We provide benefits and services to climbers that are otherwise hard to obtain. Benefits like rescue benefits. You fall somewhere on the planet Earth, we come get you to the nearest hospital. Benefits like gear discounts, benefits like lodging, benefits like the books we produce, the information that we supply. So those are benefits and services that people buy with their dues.
Right.
It's a transactional beginning, if you will. So the first order of business was to fix that business. The benefits weren't that great or not as good as they could be. So we entered into a strategic thinking that allowed us to improve the benefits, improve the marketing, and turn that membership growth around, or shrinkage around, and we began to grow. But it wasn't until about 2010 or 11 when we really started to get good at that. And since that time, the club has pretty much tripled in size.
Right. Well, as somebody who I started climbing in 1989, so well before that, and you said the word relevant, and that has as I've watched the AAC exist or first became aware of it, and then I'm actually sort of involved. I've been to Craig and Classics in the last few years and things like that. I've seen it too, because I just always, and I know I'm in. I'm not alone. When I was 20 or 25, it seemed like this thing of, the old generation, the expedition climber generation, even like this event with black ties and stuff, which I realize is
not black tie.
You're right. I know it's not, thank God.
Not black tie, and no one will ever be turned away from the American Alpine Club because of what they're wearing.
Okay, cool. No, well, the truth be told is I was like, I thought it was, and then I literally Googled pictures, because I'm going to the dinner tonight.
Yeah.
I Googled pictures just to make sure. I was like, all right, I don't want to be the worst dressed there, but I don't really have the capacity. And really, of course, like the Tommy Caldwells and everybody else were in, typical button-down, like, plaid shirts.
They wore nice suits a couple years ago.
And there's some guys in suits and stuff, and so I'll fall in the middle somewhere. But anyway, the notion, and I know you remember this as well, was that like it had nothing to do with me as like a dirtbag rock climber. It had nothing to do with me as a boulderer. It had nothing to do with me as a sport climber. That was a big. Like a lot of alpine clubs of the world, there was a point at which they sort of publicly came out against those sorts of things. So yeah, I mean, what was that in your mind in 2005? Maybe it wasn't as strident as it had been, but was that the kind of thing you think you were facing in terms of trying to get people to think about it differently?
Well, I think the relevancy relevancy word shows up in two ways. One is to deliver on that business proposition, to actually give people great benefits for their dues. So that's the core business proposition. But the other is what we would call mission delivery, to deliver on our mission to support climbers. And that we can only do with sort of the revenue you need to run a public policy program, send people to D.C. to negotiate for fixed anchors in wilderness, send people to Yosemite to negotiate for a better Camp 4, build an education program so that we can start to certify amateur instructors around the country, volunteer instructors around the country so that they can do a better job. Those are the kinds of things that are real mission delivery issues that we could only do after we fixed the business.
Sure.
And honestly, you may come for the benefits, but those benefits really only have a value when you need them, when you want them, while you're active. But it's the community of people that you find at the American Alpine Club and what we can do together to make our world better that keeps people involved. So it's kind of both about attracting people, but then having a compelling enough community that you want to stay and participate and volunteer and give of your time, like at the stewardship projects at the Kragan Classics and the volunteerism that supports those events. The trick, you talked about elder climbers patting each other on the back and dressing up. The trick is being relevant to the sport climber and the trad climber and the rock climber living in his van or a tent, and yet at the same time not abandoning our history. Right? We want both and, not either or. And I think that the trick or the moment was when we as an organization were able to admit that the American Alpine Club is about all climbers, every ilk. When we gave the Underhill Award to John Gill, a boulderer, when we started to welcome high-achieving rock climbers into our ranks, and when we recognized that the superset term is climbing, not mountaineering. That climbing is the all-encompassing term that we now need to sort of embrace and welcome people through from every walk of climbing.
Well, cool. So let me ask you a couple things about your stint. You've done 13 years. There's this. You've done a good enough job, like you said. You've outlasted what you thought you would do. By 10 years. By 10 years, I really think that. I think an institution is an institution. It's not its CEO. It's not one guy's vision. It's not one person's deal. And so I feel like jobs like mine ought to turn over about every 10 years. So as you said, you're right. I'm living on borrowed time. Yeah. I mean, but what I was going to say, you've accomplished so much, but is there anything that a couple specific things you can point to that the Alpine Club's done in the last decade, or that maybe you spearheaded that you could just be like, this is sort of, the Phil Powers legacy once they do kick you to the curb?
Well, my short answer is no. There's no Phil Powers legacy because none of what has happened in the last 13 years was done by one person. It took my board. It took great advice. I've got a wonderful staff, especially now. I will say that I did pay a lot of attention to building a good board and cultivating great volunteers to participate in this with me. So I'll take credit for being sort of in the middle of it. But if you want to look back and think about some highlights, in the late 90s, bolts were banned in lots of wilderness areas, and the concept that bolts or fixed anchors in general might be allowed in wilderness was on the table as a question mark. And we began negotiating with the National Park Service and the Department of Interior and Forest Service too, way back then. And it wasn't until very recently that the director of the National Park Service came out and said, climbing is a legitimate use of wilderness.
Right.
And if that is true, fixed anchors must be allowed. So, there you have kind of a public policy win or event that took 15 or 20 years.
Sure.
But that happened, on our watch here at the American Alpine Club. Or we're taking our hut system, which was just one quite beautiful ranch at the base of the Grand Teton, and growing it into 6 huts around the country that allow us to negotiate for better rates for our members around the world. Opening the Rumney Campground and the Gunks Campground and the New River Campground and the Snowbird Hut in Alaska and buying the Waco Rock Ranch. Those kinds of rather large investments are things that I think we're all proud of that we did together at the American Alpine Club in this sort of decade-long period. Creating this education program, I'm convinced that 10 years from now, when you think of the American Alpine Club, you will think of the body of individuals who sort of oversee climbing instruction in the United States. Not deliver it all.
Right.
Lots of people will be delivering it. YMCAs and Boy Scouts and regional clubs and Mazamas and Mountaineers. They'll be delivering it, but they'll all be delivering it slightly better because the instructors will be certified and they'll be sort of consistent in what they're teaching. That, I think, will be a legacy that we can look back on proudly 10 years from now. But it's only just begun.
Okay. And is the AMGA somehow affiliated with you guys at all?
AMGA and the American Alpine Club work very closely together. The AMGA really is a model for where we're headed. What they have done for professional mountain guides is similar to what we are beginning to do for volunteer leaders, which is, let's face it, the more affordable and more prevalent way that people learn to climb in the United States.
Yeah, especially sort of basic rock climbing skills, certainly. So what, AAC, and you've talked about it just here, like we always use this word community. I've used it on the podcast all the time. We've created sort of our own community in a way around this podcast, the people who listen avidly. And then personally, I want to move a little bit to the personal side of your climbing and who you are. But what do you think when you're down there smiling in that room we were just in with all those people of multiple generations from younger than Margot even in there all the way up to there was wasn't there a centenarian in the room?
Yeah. Gail Bates was here today, sharp as a tack at 102.
Okay.
First employee at the American Alpine Club back in the 60s.
So personally, you've chosen this life from a long time ago to this now to be in this community. What is it that you tell people outside the community maybe about why it's so great to just be live your life within the climbing world?
Well, for me, it has been my life. I grew up in Oklahoma and found a way to learn to climb even there, and made my way to Wyoming and started working for the National Outdoor Leadership School. And climbing has been the guiding force of my life. It's been either my job or my avocation or where I spend my time. Today, it's how I spend my time with my kids. We climb together. The great friendships of my life, the great opportunities in my life have all come from climbing. So for me, it is my life. I think we all I lived through, maybe you lived through some really fun and raucous times as a rock climber in the American West. Living with your friends, traveling from place to place, climbing hard, partying a little bit, having a lot of fun. But today, when I meet young people, and, well, not even that young, but climbing has changed. Climbing is a place where people really focus their attention and live healthy lifestyles. And so today, when I talk to non-climbers about climbing, I remind them that these gyms across the nation have become anchors for just really healthy, wonderful lifestyles for young people. You know, you don't go out to the bar after work if you're a young person in downtown Denver. You go to the rock gym,
right?
You know, and you go to your yoga class, and you take care of your body, and you pay attention to how you manage your mind. And it's, when I look at my kids and people like Margot and other young people in the climbing world, it really has become an anchor for a wonderful way to live. Mm-hmm. And I think it was that way when we grew up too, but it's even more that way today.
I mean, we certainly weren't health conscious in the same sense of approaching it. I mean, at least I wasn't, in my cohort wasn't, you know, looking at it really even as a terribly athletic, in the sense of like, you know, training and getting up, and you know, you went climbing, and then the next day you went climbing again, and then
back in my day we went climbing. I was either teaching NOLS courses or guiding for Colorado Mountain School, or climbing, and all of that involved climbing, being outside, being healthy. So by definition, if you will, I was a healthy person and active and you know, relatively strong climber in the world, but. It wasn't until, for example, Todd Skinner moved to Lander that I started to wake up to the fact that, wow, you could train and you could even get stronger.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I think he was one of these guys that, at least in the United States, sort of ushered in that idea in a lot of ways.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We you know, backer ladders in Joshua Tree and training facilities in Lander, and, you know, it was
a lifetime
it was infectious.
Of bad elbows.
Yeah, a lifetime of bad elbows, but it was infectious.
Right,
you know,
right.
his energy and the concept that you could get kind of scientific about it and get better.
Well, and also he was a living example of you could get better. You could climb really hard, you know. So going to your personal climbing, you know, I kind of looking at your highlights of, you know, whatever's in your resume, as it were. You know, you went all directions, including getting really into mountaineering, including high altitude mountaineering. What year about did you start climbing?
I started climbing in about 1977 back in Oklahoma, but really didn't get active as a climber until 80-81.
And did you go to NOLS as a student, or was it something you found differently?
I took a winter course at NOLS in 1979.
Okay.
And kind of talked my instructors into recommending me for the instructor's course. I don't think I was really prepared for it, but I saw something I loved and wanted to pursue, and kind of finagled my way in and ended up taking an instructor's course in 81, I think, and started working for NOLS.
Right.
And so that was my summer job, if you will, during college, and then the summer after college, I went back to work and never left.
And was that in Lander?
Yeah, that was in Lander. And, of course, I traveled the world. It was a great job. I ended up being their chief mountaineering instructor and training staff. And I had, you know, ready-made climbing partners all over the place. But back then, and I think I've lived through an interesting time in climbing. Back then, I believed, for whatever reason, that the apex of climbing activity was big mountains.
Okay, that was going to sort of be my question, right?
Yeah.
Whether that came out of NOLS or before.
I mean, what do I really love? I really love rock climbing, right?
Yeah.
Now,
Nice day,
maybe
sun's
that's because I'm older and I don't want to, you know, carry a heavy pack or sleep out in the snow. But I think really it's truly my passion. But back then, rock climbing was something we did when we weren't in the mountains. It was something that we did to get better. It wasn't really the end game that people see it as today, or even I see it as for myself today.
Right.
So you know, if I had it to do over again, maybe I'd skip the high mountains and rock climb all the time. But on the other hand, I had some extraordinary experiences traveling the world with close friends, mostly to Pakistan or Alaska, sometimes South America. But God, those were special times where you'd really work, as we heard today from the 78 K2 team, really work together to accomplish things that you just never would be able to do alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know, going back to this idea of a resume, K2, we just saw a presentation on that. That obviously stands out on your resume too, in terms, and you've climbed K2 without oxygen.
Mm-hmm.
What year was that?
93.
Okay.
I went in 1990 with a group of friends.
Mm-hmm.
We failed.
Right.
Good trip. Just, you know, rough weather,
Yeah.
and by the time the weather got good enough to try, we were kind of spent.
Mm-hmm.
Went back in 1993 with a joint sort of Canadian-American expedition led by Stacey Allison, and managed to climb the mountain.
Mm-hmm.
I think in good style. Didn't use oxygen. Didn't place any fixed lines. You know, placed some camps and acclimatized,
Sure.
and then ended up climbing it kind of round trip in 3 days, 2 days up, 1 day down. My partner on that summit bid, Dan Culver, one of my partners, died on the descent. So that's, you know, that really hangs with me as, you know, I say on the one hand, we climbed it in good style, no, but we lost someone.
Right.
So that's that will always be, in my mind, the main factor in that trip, because we lost a human being,
Sure.
you know, and that person had a life and a family and relationships in the world. So, and yeah, K2, I'm proud of it, and it opened some doors for me. But it on the other hand, is just, you know, one of many wonderful episodes that I've been able to kind of partake of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I that was actually going to be the next part of the question is, you know, those within mountaineering, you know, those names, they just pop out, and that's what. And
it's easy.
And I was
right?
curious about that as to whether or not, where it fit in your own sort of mind of your experiences and your. But I mean, if there was this lost climber on that, I mean, you have to be, I would imagine, be somewhat ambivalent a little bit about its meaning, and whether or not, you know, it was some sort of experience to put on a highlight list, or was it something?
Well, no, people put it on the highlight list, right? Because
yeah.
it's memorable, it's noticeable, people can understand that that's a big deal. But I'm far more fond of some of the other routes that I did. A big grade 6 rock climb on Lukpilla Rock on the Biafo Glacier in Pakistan, or a big North Face route on Denali, which we called the Washburn Face at the time, off of the Peters Glacier. And as I start to recite those things, it becomes clear to me that I was only able to go to some of those really special places, do some of those really special routes that I just mentioned, because of my partners. And really because of one partner, a guy named Greg Collins,
right.
From Lander back then, and from Victor, Idaho now, is, you know, just one of the great talents of this generation, and still climbing hard, still skiing steep, still a creative mind in the mountains, and I will always look back on my own achievements as things that were only possible because of guys like him. You know, you talked about community a minute ago, and community comes in lots of forms, right? Kind of writ large at the Kragan Classics, but it also comes, you know, in the form of partnership.
Right. And
Kind
just
of
the special.
The special
I mean,
twosome or threesome
right.
or foursome that really get some traction together.
And you guys still climb together?
We do.
Yeah.
Not very much.
Right.
Not very often. We're in very different places. Greg is still very active. I'm still very active, but I climb with my kids, and
right.
I climb in the Front Range, and he's still up in Wyoming. But, you know, a couple of years ago, I called him up and I said, "Hey, let's go climbing." Now, Greg is a motivated guy. So he said, "Well, okay. Show up at Teton Village with a mountain bike, a pair of skis, a rope, and a rack." And so, you know, he had an adventure plan.
Right,
we were going to ride our bikes out till the snow began and ski up to Rock Springs Buttress, and he was going to put in a new route. So, you know, you don't just say, "Let's go climbing," and Greg's going to have an agenda.
Yeah. How'd that go?
it was a great day.
Awesome. Yeah.
It was great. I was a little more tired than he was, I think, by the end.
If he's getting after it all the time.
Yeah.
So another sort of exceptional part of your life has been educating. Your capacity in that, I think, goes on, directing the American Alpine Club, because you guys are talking about that education principle that you're going to be moving forward. But what do you think drew you into that world? Again, you make choices as a climber how you're going to sort of pursue it. What's going to be the platforms to get you to where you want to go, and one of them is guiding and teaching. Especially NOLS, those guys often are very known for doing big mountain climbs on their off time and teaching and just living this life that's basically always in the mountains, whether they're working and then they're going on expeditions. That's been, I think, the tradition there anyway for a lot of the NOLSies that I know. So what was it about that, versus just being a climbing bum or banging nails to go climbing or whatever else it was?
Yeah, for me, I kind of fell in love with that group of people in Lander, Wyoming. It became this welcoming place where I had friends that I could work with and friends that I could play with and kind of ready-made partners, as I said before. I have extraordinary admiration for guys like Mark Ritchie and Steve Swenson, who had, or Jim Wickwire that we heard from today, or Lou Reichart that we heard from today, who had full-on non-climbing careers and still maintained a cutting-edge climbing life. Right. I mean, I think that is a real trick. Raise a family, do a job that has nothing to do with climbing, and still put in the time to be at the top of the game in climbing. I think that's a real trick.
Yeah, I don't know. It almost seems impossible.
I know.
Frankly.
I know. So for me, that the fact that maybe I wasn't climbing at my hardest when I was teaching at NOLS, but I was at least staying in shape and practicing. And I think teaching is actually a really wonderful way to hone your own skill. How many people that aren't teachers practice self-arrest or practice various techniques? Well, when you're teaching, you're practicing all the time because you're demonstrating and doing. And teaching for me did become something that I loved. I loved sort of coming up with the phrase that made someone's eyes light up, that they understood it.
Sure.
And I loved introducing young people to the outdoors. Over my time at NOLS, I had thousands and thousands of students, and I'm really happy and proud of the fact that I was able to introduce that many people to this wonderful world. We heard today Lou Whitaker remind us that it's a beautiful planet. Let's take care of it. And we also know that you take care of what you love, and the way you fall in love with it is to be introduced to it and see it and become comfortable there. And so that part of teaching has meant a lot to me. And now I own Jackson Hole Mountain Guides up in the Tetons, and that guide service, if you will, is a really teaching-oriented place. It's about education. It's about introducing people to the alpine environment and getting them to be comfortable there and appreciate it, as opposed to just climb the Grand Teton and go home.
Right. So you worked at NOLS. You've worked for the American Alpine Club. You now own Jackson Hole.
I've owned Jackson Hole Mountain Guides for 20 years.
For 20 years, okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean...
with my partner, Bob.
It's like literally possible. I used to joke when I was at Joshua Tree. I used to guide out there in LA, and on the weekends I'd see 20 people I had shown how to build anchors or whatever. And I would always joke, I'm personally responsible for crowding this crag.
You can argue that I've made my mistakes in that category too.
But joking aside, I mean, it sounds like you can trace yourself into educating, thousands, maybe tens of thousands of climbers?
I wouldn't, indirectly maybe.
I mean, indirectly?
Yeah, but thousands directly.
Right,
yeah.
Right. So that's pretty awesome. I mean,
it's
when you
pretty
think
awesome.
about it.
Yeah, and, I still have students and clients that I communicate with and that I know. I took my family to France last year and, met old students all across Europe. I take them to the American West. I meet old students all across the American West. I'm quite fond of, I don't think I don't think that I contributed to crowding our mountains.
No, I know. I'm just
I think I contributed to stewardship of our mountains.
Sure.
To people falling in love
Right.
and therefore voting for the environment and caring for our mountains and speaking up for public lands.
Yeah, and that's the necessary flip of the coin there from my joke about crowding the crags. But yeah, you realize the disconnection that so many people in the world in the United States have from what's going on in the environment, and it's demoralizing to think that these tens of millions and hundreds of millions of people in some places they have no idea whatever it is they're doing is causing out in the real world or in the natural world.
That's true, and so many, for example, Americans that don't even understand the wonderful places that we all own together.
Right.
That young person, down here in downtown Boston that may have never been out into the wilderness is just as much an owner of those public lands as you or I.
Right.
And I want those people to be able to take advantage of this wonderful treasure in the United States.
And coming back to that public policy thing, is the American Alpine Club in on this fight right now with Bears Ears and the other monuments being rescinded?
We are fighting,
right,
because Bears Ears matters to climbers. Mm-hmm. But I think at the American Alpine Club, our tendency is to take a little bit of a longer view, to try to preserve a conversation rather than call it a fight, and to really be willing to compromise if necessary. I think we care about the landscape, not just the climbs, but the entire ecosystem. And I think right now the great tragedy in our country is that the conversation we so much want to be a part of is not available in the way it's been in the past. It's hard to cross the lines and talk to people who might have a different point of view these days. And that's been frustrating for me.
So let me ask you about your own education. You've been a teacher, the director of the mountaineering sections of NOLS. I mean, someone who's like super versed, has everything on lockdown. You mentioned how
wrote the textbook at NOLS.
Yeah, literally, right?
Yeah.
So you've literally written the book. And what you said about teaching is, it resonated with me because I was a guide for years and taught, particularly like I would think about rescue, self-rescue courses. And my girlfriend now is always telling me, like, you need to teach me how to do all this stuff. She has a little, like most climbers, she has a little bit of knowledge. But when I sit down and I'm like, man, if I sat down and just did a clinic on it, I'm like, could I even do it at this point? Like as well as, when I was teaching it, at least, weekly or whatever, like, yeah, I was a machine. But now, I mean, I could probably draw it all back enough to get me out of trouble. But yeah, I don't have it on lockdown anymore.
I would say I'm still pretty conversant as a teacher. But let's face facts. I mean, the standard of teaching ability in this category has gone way up in the United States.
Right.
So while I think I'm still in the game that way, I know that Ron Funderburk, who works for the American Alpine Club, or Rob Hess, my partner at Jackson Hole Mountain Guides, are a level of magnitude beyond where I'm at as an actual teacher these days.
Right.
And back to your comment about your girlfriend, my family want to learn those things too. And I feel comfortable teaching that, and I do. But I also know that they need to hear it from more than just me.
Sure.
There are different ways to get taught, and there are different learning styles. And, I've had a really wonderful time putting my family in touch with other guides. Madeline Sorkin has taken my family out and taught them how to climb. They already know how to climb. They already know this stuff, but she teaches it again, and they learn it in a little different way.
Right.
And they might get a little different kind of confidence. So I'm a big fan of hiring a guide.
Yeah, totally. No, and I used to get, even friends of mine whose significant others, whether men or women were being sent to me because, sometimes teaching your significant other something is not the best way to preserve a relationship.
I agree.
It can work, but and so far I haven't really. I need to sit down with Steph or send her, or not send her, but convince her to do a course on this stuff. But what I was going to...
We can do a trade. I'll teach Steph, you teach Sarah.
Oh, it sounds good. Yeah, I'll have to brush up, though. She's in better hands, I think. Steph would be. But what I wanted to ask you about, because I'm curious about it, and I was aware of it, is that, you were in an accident, just out climbing for the day. And the reason I bring this up is because, I'm just always warning people about the letting your attention go and not taking care of your situation. And we always are, poor Lynn Hill always gets thrown into this mix because she one time didn't tie her knot and basically
didn't finish her knot. Yeah.
So she's always our example. Oh yeah, even Lynn Hill. To give her a break, I wanted to ask you about this after all these years of being in an accident where, mistakes on your part were made and what happened, and maybe we could learn real quick from it about, what you learned from it now as an educator.
Yeah, well, just to quickly tell the story, it was a simple sport climbing environment up in Clear Creek Canyon, just a couple miles from my office. And I had led a pitch to put up a top rope for people, and people weren't ready to climb, so I decided to top rope the other side of the rope. So I was on a top rope, climbed this little roof problem and got to the anchor. And for whatever reason, my belayer was under the assumption that I was going to rappel and maybe rearrange the climb or something like that. And she thinks that she heard me say, belay off. I also did some things that might have given her clues to reinforce that.
Sure.
I down climbed a little bit to rearrange part of the other rope so it would be in a better position for the next climber. And that might have felt like me pulling up rope to start to create a rappel. But for whatever reason, she believed I was going to rappel and took me off belay. So when I leaned back on the rope, it was unanchored. It was empty, and I fell to the deck about 75 feet. There may have been a little friction because the rope was running through some carabiners.
Sure.
But I hit pretty hard.
Yeah.
I broke my back in several places and broke most of my ribs and broke my arm and had a big diaphragmatic tear through which my internal organs kind of all swept up into my left lung cavity. So lots of internal organ damage that was completely repaired. Great doctors. Back is completely healed. There's one fusion. Ribs hurt for a while. But I'm fine.
Right.
I'm about an inch shorter. And I like to say I didn't really have an inch to give, but but there it went.
There it went.
But looking back on it, yeah, it's simple for me to say she shouldn't have taken me off belay.
Right.
But it takes two to tango. These accidents do not happen in a vacuum. As Jim Wickwire was saying in his presentation this morning, I was noticing that the little mistakes were accumulating. I did not pre-tell her what I was going to do. I come from a history where the leader just leads and the leader deals with what he or she sees as it comes, kind of that trad climbing background. And so since you never knew what you were going to do, you never told your belayer what you were going to do because it was an adventure. They were going to keep you on belay until something else happened. But in this case, I was climbing with someone much more novice than I, and I owed it to her to give her a clue as to what was going to happen. I owed it to her to say, I'm going to have you lower me when I get to the anchor. So I think what we've learned is that communication is even more important than it was in the past. That we have such a diversity of people coming to climbing, such a diversity of partners that we might climb with, that we owe it to each other to have a deeper commitment to communication than we've ever had in the past.
Yeah, that actually, you started to say that, and we came, I think we probably, both of us came from a time, me a decade later than you did, but where there was a homogeny, I think, in a little bit of technique and attitude towards climbing, because it was all from trad climbing.
Mm-hmm.
We hadn't encountered sport climbing yet. Go up, be lowered down.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that didn't really exist. So it is that diversity that's kind of causing the problems. All the different streams coming together from all these different places.
And the assumptions that come from those.
Right. Because, I mean, you wouldn't have had any issue, because you wouldn't have be getting lowered from something in 1985, probably, because you just didn't do that.
No.
Yeah.
Yo-yoing was bad.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I guess I kind of just wanted to, again, like,
but
take
I will
the pressure
say,
off of Lynn, and that,
take the pressure off of Lynn.
It happens.
Put it on me.
Yeah.
It happens. It happens to people who write textbooks on climbing and are mountain guides and have done, thousands and thousands of feet of climbing in their life. I'm an example. And I want to also say that, I've recovered. What happened to me was physical. What happened to my belayer was emotional. I mean, to drop someone and to be involved in that and to have all the feelings that come, that's tough stuff. So I really feel for people who've been involved in things like that. And the sad thing is that we keep seeing so many of the same accidents. We keep seeing people rappel off the end of their rope. We keep seeing similar accidents someone fell to the deck in the climbing gym last night.
I know.
And that's where this education program starts to really have meaning for me, because I don't think we're going to ever end accidents completely, but boy, we sure owe it to each other to try.
Yeah, well, and there's a pitch. You were talking about your message with the American Alpine Club, the pitch, the product, the idea of what you give for what the people give you as their dues or whatever, and it just this idea of trying to consolidate education. It's good if you're not in the American Alpine Club. The fact that the American Alpine Club is out there doing that is good for you, because you're at the cliff with these people, and when these things happen, I've joked on the show, it's like, if I see like sketchy people doing sketchy stuff, if it's like imminent death, then I go and try to maybe intervene. But if it's just sketchiness, it's time for us to go away to the other cliff, because
I get that out.
And so I think that, like, as a pitch about joining the AAC or supporting what you guys do, it's this idea that for the good of everybody, you have this mission to try to get people to a safe-ish place in climbing.
I used to kind of proselytize a lot about joining. You got to join the club. Got to join. It was kind of what was going on.
Yeah, you had to.
But what really, that was my job, I guess. Yeah. But what I would say today is, join or don't join. Live your life, right? You are who you are.
Sure.
You pick your agenda. Maybe you're working in politics. Maybe you care about climate change. But if you're a climber, whether you join or not, be thankful for those 20,000 people who did join and make sure that this good work gets done. Be thankful for those people that pay dues to the Access Fund and support that. Be thankful. Whether you do it or not yourself, recognize that there are people volunteering their time and money to make climbing better.
All right, folks, thanks for listening, and thanks to Phil for sitting down, getting that one done in between some appointments that he had. He was a very busy man at the event. I also want to thank the American Alpine Club, and the staff that Phil has accrued there is amazing. A slew of very capable women are running that show right now, actually. I know there's some other dudes that work there, but I didn't really see them doing anything. Anyway, I also want to thank Ashley from the Sharp End podcast for letting me be involved in her show. And if you guys haven't checked that out, go check it out, Sharp End podcast, and particularly the episode with Quinn Brett that we recorded at the event. A really deep, good interview there by Ashley, and thanks again for letting me be involved. All right, folks. Of course, thanks to you for listening. And please be safe out there. Spring's rolling in. If you haven't been climbing all winter, you're dusting it off. Make sure and be double, triple, quadruple vigilant about safety. You heard what happened to Phil at the end of that one. Don't let that happen to you. Talk to your partner. Make sure everybody knows what's going on. And of course, check your knot.